But for someone out of state to be eligible, they must come to Oregon for the minimum 15-day process and take the life-ending prescription to die in Oregon. This is OPB.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the estate of Joan B. Kroc, whose bequest serves as an enduring investment in the future of public radio and seeks to help NPR be the model for high-quality journalism in the 21st century. And the Annie E. Casey Foundation.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Leila Fadel.
And I'm Steve Inskeep. Good morning. Russian President Vladimir Putin has spent more than 20 years crushing opponents. So what does he do after an opponent appeared in his inner circle?
Over the weekend, Yevgeny Prigozhin sent convoys of armed men toward Moscow. Prigozhin had used his ties to Putin to rise to wealth and power, and then he and the mercenaries he'd been leading in Russia's war against Ukraine turned against the government. Putin quickly diffused the crisis by letting his former friend slip away to Belarus. We don't know how much the crisis has shaken Putin's power.
NPR's Greg Myrie is following this from Kyiv. Hey there, Greg.
Yeah, hey, Steve.
What is Putin saying now?
Well, pretty much nothing. After this huge day of chaos on Saturday, Russia has largely gone quiet. We aren't seeing or hearing from either Russian leader Vladimir Putin or the mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, the two main players. Now, Putin spoke briefly on Russian TV Saturday morning. He promised decisive action again after Prigozhin's fighters began on this highway up toward Moscow, but he's now been out of sight for more than 48 hours. State TV ran a brief interview with him Sunday, but this was taped before the weekend, so we don't know where he is or what his next move will be. One other quick note, Russia's defense minister Sergei Shoigu, who's also been invisible in recent days, visited Russian troops in Ukraine to get a briefing, according to Russia's defense ministry.
Oh, now that's significant since Prigozhin was saying that he was protesting against that defense minister, so he at least makes an appearance. How does this all look to people in Ukraine where you are?
Yeah, when the events were unfolding Saturday, there was this sort of running commentary from just about everyone. One social media video in particular went viral. It showed this well-known soldier sitting in his military truck in the field, watching the media reports from Russia, and he was munching on these 3 huge tubs of popcorn. So the Ukrainians were really very interested observers. But with the rebellion in Russia over, the attention has really turned back to the fighting in Ukraine. President Zelensky and other leaders are saying this just confirms what Ukraine has been saying all along. Russia is weak and fractured, and the only permanent solution is to drive out all the Russian troops.
As best you can tell, has Putin's government regained control of the Wagner mercenaries?
It's really hard to say with any in any definite way, so I don't want to speculate too much. What we do know is that Prigozhin gave an order for his troops to return to their camps, either in Ukraine or in southern Russia. There's been no indication that they're causing any trouble at the moment, but we haven't heard from Prigozhin either since on Saturday night he announced that he would be leaving Russia, going to Belarus. We don't know if he's still in Russia, if he's gone to Belarus, so he's gone quiet as well, and for the moment his troops are quiet.
Does all of this change Ukraine's plans for the war?
Well, it certainly comes at an opportune moment for the Ukrainians. They've just begun this offensive. It's now in its 3rd week. I think a big question they'll be trying to sort out is what happens to these mercenary fighters in the Wagner group who've played such an important role. Will they be disbanded, which appears likely? Will some be folded into the Russian army? Quite possible. So for the moment, the fighting continues as it's been going, but it's likely to have some ramifications further down the road.
NPR's Greg Myrie, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing, Steve.
What do Russians make of all of this? NPR's Fatma Tanis reports from Istanbul, a city that anti-war Russians made their haven after the invasion of Ukraine.
Elena and Maxim, a couple in their 20s, were walking their corgi when I approached them for their reaction to what was going on in Russia. They looked at each other and laughed. Like other Russians who spoke to NPR, they did so under the condition that we not reveal their full names, because they still work for Russian companies remotely.
It's circus, because even they don't have power. Even they can't control their pets.
The pet here is the leader of the mercenary Wagner group who staged the mutiny, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Russia has depended on Wagner mercenaries to advance its military goals, including in Ukraine.
They pay, he do something what they want, but they even can't control him.
Prigozhin led an armed uprising which ended only with a deal being struck that saw him exiled to Belarus. Russia also agreed to drop the charges of mutiny against him.
He is like football player. He played bad in the Russian territory, in our territory, and another country by him.
Elena says this was one of the craziest things that happened in Russia in her lifetime, second only to the invasion of Ukraine last year. The two are now worried that Russian President Vladimir Putin could increase repressive measures to consolidate his grip on power, and that life for their family and friends in Moscow might get much harder.
As we see people in Russia, it's really difficult to make government to go away. They have a lot of power.
But for others like Ilya, who used to volunteer as an election watcher back in Russia, the way it all fizzled out was a massive disappointment. He was following the events with a group of friends who were close to Alexei Navalny, the jailed Russian opposition leader.
Everything which can diminish the power of Putin's regime is good. So when we heard about this news, we were very positive. But then just it was like the worst end of a TV series, so it was a fluke.
He says they were in contact with other Russian politicians, their former colleagues, who were also excited at what the uprising could mean for Putin.
They are part of Putin's party, but they were hoping that it would bring some changes. Maybe stop the war, topple the Putin's regime. So even among Putin supporters, government officials, there are definitely a lot of people which are against him.
Ilya says they were all hoping that Wagner's march would encourage other armed groups and would turn into a bigger resistance.
Prigozhin betrayed this opportunity,
People see it as a betrayal?
because we don't know his true intentions. He's a murderer himself, and he's a thief, he's a war criminal, so basically. But still, we hope that if somehow this internal tension explode in Russia, it definitely should have helped Ukraine to drive back Russian troops and to free its own territories. And this didn't happen as well.
Do you feel like Putin is weaker now?
Yeah, of course. At least, okay, if he doesn't care about international reaction, I think he doesn't care to some extent. But for general public, they saw that Putin is not so powerful.
Ilya says the invasion of Ukraine was the beginning of the end of Putin. The chaos of Prigozhin's mutiny might be over for now, but he says it's only a matter of time before fresh turmoil hits Russia. Fatma Tanis, NPR News, Istanbul.
Some other news now from Atlanta. Activists plan a week of action opposing a police and fire training facility there.
City officials recently approved funding for the project, but opponents vowed it will never be built. In recent months, police killed one activist and accused others of being domestic terrorists.
So NPR's domestic extremism correspondent Odette Youssef has been looking into this. She is in Atlanta. Good morning.
Good morning.
For people who have not followed this every day, what is this facility and why has it drawn such attention?
Well, Steve, it's officially called the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center, and it's meant to be a state-of-the-art campus where law enforcement will train. And people I've spoken to have compared this to the Dakota Access Pipeline controversy when they're trying to explain just how significant this issue has become to the far left right now. This has drawn activists from all over because it's rolling together some of the most pressing conflicts of our time. This has been activating police abolitionists, racial justice advocates, also environmental activists who are really alarmed that this would destroy a forest that's been called one of the, quote, 4 lungs of Atlanta. And now, Steve, we're also seeing tremendous concern from watchdog groups who say that the state is exercising dangerous government overreach in the way that it has dealt with some of the activists.
Well, let's talk about that. How did police come to say that some of these activists are domestic terrorists?
Well, in December, we started to see arrests of some of the activists, and law enforcement began alleging that dozens of them belong to a group deemed a domestic violent extremism group. And that has caused some confusion. Namely because, Steve, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security does not keep a list of domestic violent extremist groups, because doing so could be construed as criminalizing certain political viewpoints. And we might be starting to see local officials struggling with this now, because on Friday there was this very surprising development. One of the prosecutors here, DeKalb County District Attorney Sherry Boston, announced that her office will not prosecute 42 of these defendants after all. Here she is speaking on station WABE, saying that local officials have struggled to see eye to eye on all of this.
We had some differences, and when I say we, I mean myself and the Attorney General's office, about who should be charged and what they should be charged with.
I want to understand what's being said there. So the county prosecutor, or a county prosecutor, does not want to proceed with this case, but then she refers to the state attorney general. What does that mean for the case?
That's right. So that's State Attorney General Chris Carr, who our understanding is still pursuing these cases. But the thing is, Steve, Carr is a Republican, and so this development has further bolstered this argument. For many who've had doubts about the underlying motivation for the case, they see it as a political vendetta against leftist activists and as the state using its authority to repress dissent. Carr's office did not respond to questions or requests for interview.
What are you watching for this week? When we say a week of action, what does that mean?
Well, activities will be happening throughout the week, and I'll be watching to see if there's some direct action near the forest where an activist was killed in January, specifically to see if that results in arrests and further allegations of domestic terrorism.
NPR's Odette Youssef, thanks for your reporting.
Sure thing.
In other stories we're following this morning, Oregon lawmakers could gain the ability to remove the governor and other statewide officials under a measure headed to voters next year. Oregon is the rare state to have no process allowing the legislature the ability to eject executive branch officials. That would change under a measure lawmakers have referred to voters. Under the proposal, 2/3 of Oregon House members could impeach the governor, attorney general, secretary of state, state treasurer, or state labor commissioner. They'd be limited to doing so in cases of corruption, dereliction of duty, or a high crime. Once an official was impeached, they could be removed by a 2/3 vote of the Senate. Republicans have pushed for creating an impeachment process all year. The idea gained steam after a scandal involving Secretary of State Shemaya Fagan. She ultimately resigned in May. The impeachment measure will need to be approved by voters next year. You can see more details at this on OPB and opb.org. The time is 6:20, and this is OPB's Morning Edition. Today's Monday, June 26th. Good morning. I'm Tim Monicum. An elderly man lost his life savings after he was duped by a post on Instagram that promised riches through crypto investment. He tried to get his money back, but hit walls along every turn. We'll hear his story in about 2 minutes here on OPB. Plus, 30 years ago this month, Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park was released and created such a splash that many fans ended up pursuing a career in paleontology. We'll have the details. Those stories are just ahead. Support for OPB comes from our sustaining members, thank you, and from Providor Fine Foods, a grocery experience with an array of specialty foods and wines for your summer cooking and picnicking at 24th and Northeast Sandy Boulevard in Portland. From Birdsmouth Design building and retrofitting all-electric, energy-efficient homes that keep you cool indoors while providing fresh, filtered air even when the power is out. In Portland and in Stevenson, you hear us at 91.5 FM, at Manzanita at 106.5. This is OPB at 621.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Workday, an enterprise management cloud focused on providing organizations with a system to continuously plan for all what-if scenarios. Workday, the finance, HR, and planning system for a changing world. From Imaginable Futures, celebrating the hard work, commitment, and achievements of the 1 in 5 college students who are parents. More at imaginablefutures.com. From Bank of America, offering access to resources and digital tools designed to help local to global companies make moves for their businesses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/bankingforbusiness. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Steve Inskeep.
And I'm Layla Faldin. Good morning. Cryptocurrency scams are on the rise. Last year, more than 50,000 consumers reported being defrauded by a crypto scam. NPR's Bobby Allen has this story of just one of them.
I'm sitting at a dining room table in Los Angeles, about to ask a family about something they really don't want to talk about.
Obviously, there's like a shame component to this and coming to reality and to grips with, hey, I lost 100% of my family's liquidity. Maybe there's a way to get it back.
That's Lena O'Connor. Her dad made a friend online who convinced him to invest in crypto. It was a scam. But by the time she found out, it was too late.
We basically had an intervention of walk us through what you've been doing. Let us explain to you why this is a fraud. And he was like, okay, I won't talk to them anymore. I won't give them any more money.
He did. In all, he lost his life savings, $340,000. Lena's brother, Daniel, says the scammer preyed on his father's loneliness.
There's a lot of people out there like him, aging boomers who are at home, who might be a little lonely, who aren't as engaged, and who didn't grow up in a time where technology was as available.
As Lena and Daniel talk, their father, Noam Lantzman, sits quietly and listens. He tells me about his immigrant story. He came to LA from the former Soviet Union.
When I came here, I spoke little English, so I have to start it from the scratch.
He ended up in the restaurant supply business for decades. Then the pandemic hit.